Good evening. Welcome to our Good Friday service. If you're visiting with us this evening, we're especially happy to welcome you. It is our hope that this service will be a source of meaning and hope for all who are here today. We begin with opening sentences. There really is nothing good about it. There is no good in violence and fear and injustice and cruelty. Yet we call this day good because God was there that day. We call this day good because God is here this day. Knowing that God is with us, let us have courage to hear this terrible story once again, and let us worship God.
The conspiracy group for no good, the conspiracy. It was 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of the Unleavened Bread. The religious leaders who collaborated with the Roman occupation were conspiring against Jesus. They had gathered in the palace of Caiaphas, the high priest, and were planning to arrest and destroy Jesus quietly so as to avoid a popular revolt among the Jews. Then one of the 12 named Judas, son of Simon the Iscariot, went to the chief priest and asked, "What will you give me if I deliver him to you?" And they paid him 20 pieces of silver. 20 pieces. And from that moment, he sought an opportunity to betray Jesus.
At the beginning of the feast, when the Passover lamb was sacrificed, the disciples of Jesus approached him and asked, "Where do you wish us to prepare the Paschal meal?" Jesus took 2 of his disciples and instructed them, "Go into the city, and you will see there a man carrying a water jar. He will show you a suitable place." The 2 did as Jesus commanded. They entered the city, where they found a man with a water jar, who brought them to a large upper room. When evening had come, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were eating, he said, "I tell you truly that one of you is going to betray me." The disciples were stunned with grief and began to protest one after the other. "Surely not I," Jesus replied. "The betrayer is one of you dipping his hand in the dish with me. The Son of Man is fulfilling Scripture, but woe to that man through whom the Son of Man is betrayed." Then Judas slipped out into the night.
Holy Jesus, how have you offended that mortal judgment has on you descended, by foes derided, by your own rejected, oh, most afflicted.
Then, having sung a hymn, they left the city for the Mount of Olives. As they walked, Jesus said to his disciples, "You will all desert me this very night. So it is written in the prophet Zechariah, 'Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered.'" Then Peter protested, "Though all desert, I will remain with you." Jesus replied, "I tell you truly, that in this very night, before the cock crows twice, you shall deny me 3 times. Still Peter maintained, "Even though I must die with you, I will never deny you." And so declared all the disciples.
Jesus halted at an olive grove called Gethsemane. Then going apart with Peter, James, and John, he left them on watch and continued a little farther alone. There he fell on his face in anguished prayer. Soon he returned to the 3 on watch and found them sleeping. Rousing them, he asked Peter, "Could you not watch with me for just 1 hour? Watch and pray that you are not put to the test, for the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, Jesus went apart in troubled prayer, and again he returned to find the disciples sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. A 3rd time, Jesus withdrew to pray. And a 3rd time, he found the disciples sleeping. Then Jesus said, "Sleep on and finish your rest. Now is the time for the Son of Man to be delivered into the hands of sinners. Here comes my betrayer."
Jesus had not finished speaking before Judas, one of his own disciples, arrived with a group of Roman soldiers and other armed men from the temple. Now the betrayer had arranged with the authorities for a sign and had said, "The man whom I kiss is the one you want." In accord with this arrangement, Judas went directly to Jesus and cried out, "Greetings, Master." He gave him the kiss. Jesus responded, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" Immediately, the soldiers laid hands on Jesus and held him fast. Then one of the disciples with Jesus drew his sword and cut off an ear from the slave of a high priest. But Jesus said to him, "Sheath your sword. All those who take up the sword will perish by the sword. Do you not know that I can call upon my Father and that he will respond at once with more than 12 legions of angels?" Then turning to the mob, Jesus continued, "Have you come for me as against a rebel bandit with swords and clubs? Why did you not seize me in the temple where I sat teaching by day? Were you so afraid of the Jewish people that you must come for me by stealth? Nevertheless, your actions are fulfilling the words of the prophets." And then his disciples forsook him and fled.
Those who had seized Jesus brought him to Caiaphas, whom the Romans had made a high priest. Peter followed at a distance as far as the courtyard. There he sat with the attendants and warmed himself by the fire. The high priest had gathered his whole council, and they began to arrange the case against Jesus, which they would present to Pontius Pilate, the governor. The charge was that Jesus claimed to be the king of the Jews, and they brought in many false witnesses, but to no avail. Finally, 2 came forward and testified. "We heard this man say, 'I will tear down this temple made with hands, and within 3 days build another not made with hands.'" The testimony was evidence that Jesus claimed an authority over temple affairs, which traditionally belonged only to the rulers of Israel. And in those days, Israel was ruled by Rome. Yet even those witnesses were unable to agree on their testimony. Finally, Caiaphas stood up and examined Jesus directly. "Have you no answer to these charges?" Jesus remained silent. "Are you the anointed one, the Son of the Blessed?" Jesus answered, "I am, and you shall see the Son of Man seated on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven." The high priest turned and said, "What need have we of witnesses? He has condemned himself." They all concurred that Jesus was indeed worthy of death. Then those holding Jesus began to spit on him. They covered his face and were striking him as they taunted him and said, "O anointed one, prophesy who it is who is striking you."
The denial. Now Peter was warming himself in the courtyard when a small slave girl entered.
She confronted Peter and said, "You also were with this Jesus of Nazarene."
"I do not know what you are talking about," Peter replied.
Meanwhile, the cock crowed.
A slave girl followed Peter out and said to the bystanders, "This man is one of them."
Again, Peter denied knowing Jesus.
After a little while, the bystanders directly to Peter, "Surely you are one of them, for you speak with a Galilean accent."
"I do not know this person of whom you are speaking," but the cock interrupted him as it crowed for the second time.
Immediately Peter remembered how Jesus said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny the 3 times."
He went out and wept bitterly.
The repentance. When morning arrived, all of the chief priests, along with the other Roman collaborators, bound Jesus and delivered him over to Pontius Pilate, the imperial Roman governor. When Judas saw what was happening, he knew that Jesus was doomed, and he repented. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and confessed, "I have sinned in betraying innocent blood. What is that to us? That is your affair." Judas threw down the 30 pieces of silver in the temple. Then he went out and hanged himself. Picking up the silver pieces, the chief priests said, "It is unlawful to put this silver into a treasury, for it is blood money. whereupon they used the money to buy the potter's field for the burial of strangers. Therefore, that field is known to this day as the field of blood.
The trial. Jesus stood before the Roman governor as the accusers made their charge. We found this man perverting our nation. He was forbidding us to pay taxes to the emperor and proclaiming himself anointed king. The governor asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "You say so." The chief priests were accusing him of many things. Therefore, Pilate again spoke to Jesus. "Have you no answer to give? Look at how many accusations they are making." Jesus astonished Pilate by remaining silent.
The demonstration. At that festival, the governor used to release a prisoner, and some were urging Pilate to do so at this time. Now there was a notable rebel in prison with those who had committed murder during the insurrection. His name was Barabbas. Therefore, the chief priests arranged a demonstration to demand Barabbas. Pilate asked them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus the Anointed One?" The demonstrators shouted, "Barabbas." "What shall I do with Jesus the Anointed One?" "Crucify him." "Are you certain of his guilt?" "Crucify him, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" "We have no king but Caesar." Then Pilate agreed to release Barabbas, and Jesus was handed over to his soldiers for scourging and crucifixion.
The mocking. The soldiers led Jesus away within the governor's palace. There they assembled the whole battalion. They clothed Jesus in royal purple. They set a crown of thorns upon his head and shoved a reed between his fingers for a scepter. They began to mock him by kneeling before him and proclaiming, "Hail, King of the Jews." They also spat upon him and smote him on the head with a stick. Then, after mocking him, they took away the purple, returned his clothes, and brought him out to crucify him.
On the road, they met an African of Cyrene named Simon, in from the countryside. Him they compelled to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means skull. There they crucified him. They offered him wine mingled with myrrh, but he refused it. His garments they divided among themselves, casting lots for them. Over his head they inscribed the charge against him, the King of the Jews. Also, there were 2 insurrectionists crucified with him, one to his right and one to his left. Those who passed by were shaking their heads in derision, saying, "So you would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days? Save yourself. Come down from the cross." Likewise, the priestly collaborators mocked him as they said one to another, "He saved others. Himself he cannot save. Let the Anointed One, the King of Israel, come down from the cross, that we may see and believe." Even the 2 crucified with him reviled him.
The death. Now from midday there was darkness over the whole land until 3 p.m. At that hour Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of the bystanders said, "Look, he is calling for Elijah." One of them put a sponge full of vinegar on a stick and laid it to his lips. Others said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." Then, Jesus, having uttered a loud cry, breathed his last breath.